we have like...
It's bright.
Wow, the lights are really bright
Wow, it is
up
bright.
here when you actually sit down. Cool. Hi, thanks everybody for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about all things scale. This morning we were talking about onboarding seamlessly and quickly. Jean-Denis had that amazing graphic with his initial intro, and we have some lessons to discuss with the tremendous scale that we've seen with Robinhood and Cash App and the Plaid side of that story as well. And so for the next 30 minutes, we'll get to hear a little bit about those exciting stories, the challenges we've navigated, and I will be leading or doing my very best to work with all of these fine people to give you the best stories. We just had lunch together, shared some of our war stories, so hopefully, I don't know, we don't have a script, so we're gonna see how it goes. I will let all of them introduce themselves, so I'll start. I'm Kira, I lead our financial access engineering team here at Plaid, been here for 4 years, have had the pleasure of working with Jean-Denis, and then I've met these two in the past few weeks, so new friends, and I'll let each of you introduce yourselves.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Jean-Denis, CTO of Plaid. You met me this morning, so I'm going to keep it short.
Okay, really short. I'm Surabhi. I run engineering at Robinhood. I've been there for 2 years, and I would say we've gone through a lot of scale, and I would think of it as how do you scale engineering, other technical functions, data science, corporate engineering, TPM, QA. How do you make all of that work? How do you grow in different locations? We've had to tackle all of that in the last couple of years, so excited to share more on that.
I'm excited to hear more. I'm Tom. I lead engineering for Cash, which is part of Block. I've been with Square/Block for 4.5 years. Originally joined in Australia, so I apologize in advance. I'm Australian, I swear a lot, so hopefully no one's offended.
Tom and I are going to get along. Any of you who have worked with me, Tom and I are going to get along. Cool. So we have seen unprecedented growth within the fintech industry over the last 2 years, especially with Robinhood and Cash App. We've had some game stonks. We've had a lot of really interesting events that have changed the way that we think about fintech. Surabhi, when you and I were talking a couple weeks ago, we were talking about like the Black Swan events and what that looked like on your side, because I think Jean-Denis and I got to see what it looked like on the Plaid side. There was a full scramble with the GameStop initial push. Yeah. So I would love to hear what it was like from your side. What lessons did you learn from those Black Swan events?
Yeah. Okay, so to start with, I'll say that, in engineering, there are problems that are very hard to solve, like naming, right? But scale is a problem that can be solved, right? You just need focus, you need to put people on it. So I'll start by saying that, yes, when you have problems, there is a way out. When I first started, I don't think I quite realized sort of the extent to which we were growing and the growth that we were seeing in our volume. And I would say in a course of less than a year and a half, we had 3 Black Swan events, right? The pandemic, then we had GameStop and meme stock meets social and all of that, and then crypto started surging. And it was a lot. It was a lot in different parts of our stack. And I would say that one of the lessons that I realized very quickly was that, hey, we need to have like a plan A and a plan B. So sometimes people think, okay, we need to redo our architecture, we need to remove these single points of failure. All of that is right, but that's not going to happen overnight. So you need a short-term and a long-term plan, and we definitely tackled both. We actually had a task force that was working on the sort of reactive work, just making sure everything was going as expected. And then a whole set of people that were focused on how do we make sure that in 6 to 12 months, we clearly see light at the end of the tunnel, right? And that's exactly how we approached it. So again, it's a solvable problem. You need to make some hard trade-offs. You need to make sure that people are willing to actually commit to solving all of those issues. We tackled on-call burden, right? Like people were on call a lot. And the reality was that people wanted to ship all these products, but at the end of the day, they would keep getting pulled back into doing this foundational work and fixing problems from their on-call. And so that's how we got out of it. Fingers crossed.
Tom, you had a similar story with Cash App Fridays, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Cash App Fridays were this community-initiated event that people started posting their cash tags on Fridays, and our marketing team is phenomenal, and they got wind of this and they started, I guess, amplifying it. And in the very early days, we used to often go down on a Friday, so we had lots of, I guess, kind of rituals around what we do on a Fridays, don't deploy, keep your merges small, things like that. And so we worked similarly. We worked really hard to avoid going down on Fridays. We collaborated very closely with marketing to make sure if they were doing, a campaign with Meg the Stallion, say, that we'd be aware of that more than a day before. And we've been pretty lucky for a while, but we were, I guess, methodical in how we tackled it. And hearing you talk about like the short versus the long term really resonated with me. So some of the things that we did, so Cash started as a P2P system. And so one of the metrics that we track in our InfoRad dashboard is essentially payments per minute. And in the early days, it was like low 600s, and then it started going up. And we had a bunch of initiatives around like tracking payment, I guess, volume. And so we had this initiative called Cash 10K. So how do we handle and scale to 10,000 payments per minute? And then it was how do we handle and scale to 20,000 payments per minute? And that sounds low in terms of like, QPS, but in terms of like all of the work that's involved in like sending a P2P payment to someone, it's actually quite a lot. And so these initiatives kind of let us tackle, I guess, the short term and release the pressure around some of the kind of urgency, I guess, and the fires that were there. But it doesn't mean you can take your eye off the ball. And I think even like literally like this week and last week, we've been having discussions about what is the next thing we need to be doing, what are the long-term plans we have in place, what is like plan, not just like A, B, but also like C and D to make sure that we are de-risking as much as possible because it's so fundamental to the business, the tech stack in supporting the business. And so, yeah, lots of learning there.
Yeah, I think I remember when we had the first GameStop spike, my team was scrambling. We were trying not to overload the banks. We were like turning down our volume for our asynchronous updates. And so there's sort of this interesting balance of what do you do right now to solve the issue, to alleviate that pressure? But then it took us like probably a full year from that to really start executing on fundamentally changing the architecture that allowed us to have better control over how we sent traffic, right? So we did all of those short-term things. We put processes in place. So how do you think about, we were talking about technical debt at lunch. How do you think about like making the time as engineering leaders to invest in those long-term solutions versus resources being put towards alleviating that pressure? Because it's all coming from the same pool, right? Jean-Denis, feel free to jump in here with your perspective as well.
Yeah. Let me go back actually to the first thing, which is, every company has things that are easy and things that are difficult, and it depends very much on the kind of product that you have. So one thing that's difficult at Plaid is that often we don't know when to expect traffic spikes because we don't control it, right? Like, sure, for the Super Bowl, maybe some of our customers will tell us that they will have ads during halftime, but maybe they won't all tell us, and we won't know what's about to happen, right? So we try to, and there I think we were pretty ready for it. But if a customer at one point or another wants to do a big marketing campaign, we might not know. And I think that's been a challenge because I think a lot of the advice that you gave is I think about past experiences for me. It's scaling. It's about planning. In general, you can kind of know which database isn't going to scale, or you can profile your services and find out which ones are going to have trouble, and you know how bad it could get. You can kind of guesstimate. But when you don't control your traffic patterns, it's a little bit more difficult. And what's interesting for Plaid is, like you were saying, our offline traffic, like accounts that are already connected that we're synchronizing with the banks, that's 50, 100 million plus accounts. Live traffic, number of people who are signing up for apps, it's on the order of 500,000 to 1 million people a day, right? So even if live traffic really spikes in terms of our total traffic, it's not much. Like it's an extra 5% here. Like generally you can handle it. So all the things that broke were things that we weren't expecting to break. So for example, we were talking about fraud and risk earlier. Our rate limiting, right, for fraudulent signups is what was blocking signups from happening when we had giant traffic spikes a year ago. And it turns out that like we had lots of monitoring for other things not scaling, but we didn't have any monitoring about like rightful traffic actually triggering our fraud systems. And so when the incident happened, like during the on-call, it was like, well, who actually even knows how this works? Oh, it's someone from the fraud team. Oh, but they're not generally like part of the rotation of people who look at Cev zeros. So like, where are they? Like, they're not on the pager. Like, what's their phone number? It was all these little operational things that you're not ready. And I think to your point about taking a year to get there is, it's the operational aspect is, I think, what you really need to invest a lot in. Like the playbooks, how do you educate new engineers, right? Failure modes from 2 years ago that you fixed, people today forget. And so then you have an incident that actually looks like the incident 2 years ago, but no one remembers like the flag and, you're like in some random dashboard somewhere that allows you to alleviate a situation. And then I think the other challenge for us has been the financial system, because we don't control all of our infrastructure, right? So if one of our partners themselves can't handle the traffic, right, what can we do about it? Like we can get on the phone and we can talk to them, but if they have data centers and it's going to take a month to order new hardware and to install it and the procurement process, there's literally nothing we can do in the moment. So I think more and more the way we want to think about these things as a partner with the financial institutions and like really try to think long term about what the ecosystem is going to need to be successful. So yeah, I don't know if it kind of answers it. But in terms of setting time aside for it, right, the rule is if someone gets in trouble, if it doesn't work, then maybe someone has an incentive to fix it within your company. And so if scalability starts to become a problem, like you got to find a human whose job it is to deal with it. I think on our infra team, there's a human whose name starts with letter A, who historically has been in charge of that for a long time at Plaid, and I think without him, we would never have been as successful as we are today. I didn't give you his full name because I don't want you all to like go and hire him.
I'm sure somebody here will figure it out.
Yeah, he knows.
Actually, one thing I'll add is that like we did a pretty hard pivot, I would say, in 2020 when we were seeing a massive scale. And I think the reality, like sometimes people wonder, like, hey, how did you make that decision? And I will just say that we looked at teams and we said, what do you have to deliver? The work that they wanted to deliver far exceeded the capacity that they had. And so we had to have that conversation. I think one of the hardest things you need to do is how do you present that information in a way that all of the business partners understand? And ultimately, if your app is not up, you don't have a product, right? So it is something that people can connect to, but you still need to represent it as like, why is this existential to the company and why do you need to do it now, right? Because there'll always be technical debt. Like there'll never be a perfect system, right? And so that's why it's important on how you kind of get buy-in from the rest of the company.
I love listening to these stories. It's interesting you talk about presenting, I guess, metrics to different business stakeholders. We were in a meeting a few weeks ago and we were talking about scaling of this system, and we were actually trying to convince this team that they didn't want to build what they were building within one of our monoliths. And the product manager was there as well, and the product manager was like, okay, if we don't do this and we do this other thing, tell me what the QPS reduction will be by not building it in this service. And all of the engineers looked at each other and we said, we can't answer that. And the PM was like, why? We're very data driven. We're going to make like X million dollars of revenue through this. And if you're saying, no, it's going to take 3 months, I need to be able to quantify that. And I was kind of embarrassed, I think, a little bit because we couldn't answer that as an engineering team. And so I think it's really important, to your point, to be able to present things so that you can take like make actionable, I guess, decisions based on that. We came to a great outcome there, and it actually changed the way that we've been thinking about, I guess, we have this thing now with our main monolith, and I think about it in terms of like budgets. So if you've heard of this term like error budgets, we're thinking about it in terms of like QPS or time budgets. So a certain team gets a certain amount of budget to operate in our monolith, but over time that budget is reduced. And so if they take stuff out of the monolith or they make performance improvements in their code, they can still operate within the budget. And maybe they add something else back in, and that gives them the autonomy and the freedom to be able to do that work, but also gives us the certainty that over time, every team is trending down. And so that's one way that we solve that.
That's actually a really interesting framework.
It was a very cool idea. It wasn't mine, but I was like, oh my God, this is awesome.
I don't know, as the leader, you get to take credit for
No, you don't.
other people's good ideas, right? So, I mean, that's one way to think about sort of tech debt and foundational improvements, but the other place where you, like the short term versus long term, but the other place where you pay for that, where you're taking resources away, is how you think about investing in new products versus preparing your core set of products to scale. So how do you think about balancing those trade-offs?
Who wants to go?
I'll go first. I was already talking, and I feel like I keep deferring to you too. I think there's several ways that you can do that. So you can, I think about the conceptual stack that Cash's engineering team is, and like down the bottom, you've got closer to the hardware, so you've got infrastructural teams, and up the top, you've got sort of product teams. And one of the ways that we think about that is by, I guess, defining the organizational structure. And over time, product teams should be, I guess, focused on customers and like solving customer problems and providing value. And then over time, as those products mature, we try and push them deeper into the stack. And so, for example, we'll create, say, a platform team within a product team, and then over time, as multiple product teams use that service, we might push it down deeper. And so we have various layers now in Cash of platform teams. So we have platform teams in product, we have a team we call financial platform that builds financial primitives, essentially API-based services. We have cloud platform teams, and the deeper you go, the model of the team changes. So rather than having like an engineering team and a design team and a product team, you might have an operations team and an engineering team. And they're working together in partnership to be scaling the systems, making them more reliable, cost optimizing them, et cetera. And by pushing them deeper in the stack, you can effectively ring fence those people and give them a sense of identity that's all about like, let's make this thing as reliable as possible, or let's make this thing as redundant as possible, or let's make this thing as globally scalable as possible. And then you can let your product teams take care of like solving customer problems and doing the thing that they do best without like having to, I guess, ask them to do two different things and have like a dichotomy of identity.
Interesting. So your approach is kind of like structural, even at the organizational
One
level.
approach, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the organization structure completely resonates. What I will say is that, you know, in the process of scaling, when you're seeing a lot of customer growth, to scale responsibly, there is a lot of work to do. And as you have more and more customers, the needs from being in a highly regulated industry that all of us are in, there's just a lot to tackle, right? So it's important to get your core business set up right to scale. Now, for Robinhood, we actually had a couple of things that we did pretty early that we saw results later. So one of them was crypto. We launched that product, I think about 3 years ago, and then when we saw the spike last year, we had a product going and that we could continue to invest in. We also launched a debit card product as part of our brokerage and as a standalone app. Standalone product earlier this year. And so I just think that as you think of diversification, get your core business going. Diversification and the bets you take are important. But again, organization, you have to be aligned on, do you care about assets under management? Do you care about getting more customers? Do you care about number of trades? Like whatever, there are many metrics. So I think also just being aligned there and make sure strategically you know where everyone's headed is super important.
Yeah, I think I love both of the answers. I want to talk a little bit about, I think what's difficult about innovation when you're a company is this idea of like the things that you're good at to scale your core business are probably not the things that you need to be good at to ship more products and features over time. And so, you know, my initial answer to this, like when I was thinking about it, it was to talk about like the 70-20-10 framework, which is kind of a framework around resource allocation, where what percentage of your team, 70% you have working on your core product, then maybe 20% is working on a set of features that roughly sell to the same customers, and then maybe you have 10% of your team that's working on moonshots, right? Things that are really outside of the wheelhouse. And in theory, it's awesome, and it's what we practice internally, but what's missing from it is this capabilities views, which is like, do you even have people on your company that are ready to do the moonshot work, or that are even ready to sell slightly different products to your current customers? And so something that I was very proud of at Plaid that came from both of the founders early on was like a real focus on the core business, because it's always felt like we're on top of this giant wave. It keeps being bigger and bigger than people expect. Like, the sky's the limit for how big the core business is. And so we invested so much in it, right? We invested in like, how do we integrate with more banks? How do we improve data quality? Like, but it's a narrow set of capabilities. And also then suddenly when you need to do something very different, you look around, you have great engineers, great PMs, great designers, but they're not used to the kind of thinking that you might need for a new product. So, in the last 3 years, we really pushed hard towards figure out like, how can we ship more? And one thing I'm proud of today is we shipped a lot today. And like, to all of you, I hope you're excited about it, but to us, like, it took real effort to get to a point where we could systematically ship like new APIs, new feature, new UI to our customers in a way that was very customer centric. But the reality is there's things we looked at, and we're actually building the capability in-house. It doesn't matter how smart we are, is very, very difficult, right? And so for us, like strategic partnerships, acquisitions are really smart way to bring things in-house that allow you to do more than we can today. And actually, my pure engineering heart is always like, oh, we can build it better than anybody else. And you never ever want to have anything in your head where you feel you can do it better than other people, because then you're not humble, right? So, but my leader hat says much more like, what's the most effective way to build something? And it's not often to build it. Sometimes it's to partner with somebody else. It's to acquire somebody else, right? Those things are very powerful. So.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we announced that we were acquiring Cognito, and they came in and did like their product demo. And I remember I was actually in the New York City office at the time. We were watching it up on the big screen, and I was just like, oh my God, we never, like, it would have taken us so long to build that. How many other things would we have had to have deprioritized to build it? Because it was like a really nice demo right out of the gate. And so I think that is a good strategy at times. Recognize like maybe we should take somebody who's already figured some of this out and work with them to deliver on it. So one thing that I think runs through all of this is going back to the people and having the capability to be able to deliver on the short term, the long term, the big bets. All of that means you have to have the right people and the right culture. And culture is something that I have found interesting to scale since I was the first hire in our Salt Lake City office, and I was working on choosing the right people to be the culture carriers, like build the right culture. And then now that my team is over 80 people, like how has that changed over time? So I'd love to hear your takes on how you scale culture and what part culture plays in scaling a business.
I think I'm just going to duck out of this one. I'd love to hear it from the two of you, and then Kira, because Kira is actually fantastic at scaling culture, so I think she'll have good takes.
Okay, I can go. I will say that scaling culture became infinitely harder during the pandemic, right? Because when you see people, you talk, you feel the energy, you walk into a room, it's just a completely different experience from getting on a Zoom call, the meeting is done, you leave, and you can't have that hallway conversation or anything. So we all face that. I think we started to really think of our onboarding experience. I think that first sort of experience and how do you build the community and the camaraderie, I think is incredibly important. I like to think of like what's your starting cohort of people, because what's common is you've all joined the company at the same time, right? And you might not be on the same team, but you still feel like you can go and reach out to them. So I think on the culture piece, you have to be intentional. It got much harder, and especially in times of rapid growth, you try to kind of hold on to what's special. And I don't know, I think you have to set up more traditions and really make sure that people understand that and what's special about the company, right? Because otherwise, they don't have that connection, and then they're like, okay, I'll go somewhere else. Like, they don't have the emotional attachment.
Yeah, and intentionality is a huge piece of it for me. When we were opening up the Salt Lake City office, I remember I interviewed some people that I would probably hire today, actually, but passed on then because they weren't invested enough. You know, they were there to write the code and they were excellent engineers, but they weren't there to make sure that they were going to be able to mentor and support other people. And since I was leading a new team in a new office, like I needed people who were going to be extra collaborative and willing to mentor and spend that extra time instead of just going into their whole coding a whole bunch of stuff, coming out and saying that we're done. So that was, the intentionality piece was huge for me. And the other thing that I think of when building culture, at least within my team, I've sort of anchored it on two pillars. One being ownership. If you ask anybody who's worked with me, like, ownership is a huge deal to me. There is no such thing on my team as that's not my job. And I think that that was really important for us to be able to scale, because if we needed to get something done that was in like another service or an area that we didn't know how to do it, we still had to get it done. And we would try and work with other teams to get it on their roadmap, but if that didn't happen, we got to do the work. We still got to do it. And so ownership was huge, but I think the other counterbalance to ownership is empathy, which was also a huge part for me, because we were all in the trenches together. And if you have ownership without empathy, I think that it risks turning into sort of a cutthroat, throw somebody under the bus so that you can make sure that like whatever you own is the best off, right? So like I think the empathy and recognizing that we're all here to help each other, I think those two things were really important in my experience to how we were able to scale the team, preserve culture, and still like deliver on the most important work.
A lot of that resonates with me, Kira. I think sounds like what you guys did in Salt Lake City was similar to like the approach Cash has taken. Cash's engineering team's been, I guess, distributed from maybe not day one, but very close to. And the thing that we do is we essentially try and find an anchor person in a new city and build the team around that anchor person. And so essentially, like the formal title is site lead, right? But it's essentially somebody who's going to be the culture carrier, who you can trust and delegate a lot of that work to. And then it's a slow ramp up over time. And so like I started in our Melbourne office, I was number 4. The first hire I think took 9 months, right? Well, actually, the first hire was there. They moved from San Francisco to Melbourne. But then the second hire took 9 months, the third hire took 4 months, the fourth hire took 3 months or whatever. And we've ramped from sort of one person in 2017 to there's now almost 200 in Melbourne today. And so being super intentional about that and then being able to replicate that globally. So when we started the Portland office or when we started a New York office, et cetera, we're able to, I guess, leverage that same pattern. But the thing that's changed, like what you said about, I guess, COVID affecting things or the shift to distribution, is that you have to, as you scale and as we've become more distributed, you've got to be much, much more overt in the things that you're doing. Because otherwise, when you're small, it's really easy because you're all sitting in the same room or you're getting together every quarter. But as you're growing, there are people like who have never seen each other in person. So I was in the office a few weeks ago and I saw a product manager that I hadn't seen in 3 years, right? And that's shocking compared to the culture that we used to have, which was everybody knew each other. It was more family oriented, like, everyone would hug each other when they saw each other, whereas now it's like, oh, I haven't seen you for 2 years, what do I do? And so getting more overt, getting more explicit, systematizing those, whether it's onboarding, whether it's defining your values, whether it's talking about how you work, and just generally over-indexing on that kind of explicitness is something I think you have to do as you scale.
I was just thinking I'm very good at being explicit, but maybe not in the same way you were saying. No, I think that COVID and being a more distributed workforce presents its own challenges, but a lot of opportunities as well, because you get a lot of different perspectives, and if you're able to cultivate those relationships, then you can, you can run a better team because you have different. Jean-Denis thinking hard about this. You have like different people who are living very different lives, whereas sometimes if you are going into the same office every day, like I think that there's a baseline that is both positive and in some ways limiting. But I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think that they both have really interesting challenges in preserving culture. I don't want to like go too hard on culture because I feel like my entire LinkedIn feed is just like, how do you build culture in a remote world all the time? I want to know what is next. So we've all been on these interesting journeys over the past 2 years, figuring out how to scale culture and our systems, and Fintech has gone up and down a lot in the last 2 years. So what's next for each of you? What are you most excited about, and what are you most scared about?
Yeah, I was wincing to the remote things. I think it's harder, but I'm maybe just an old dog, and I'm having trouble adapting to the new game. I used to feel like I got so much signal on people, walking around an office, just a lot of cues about what's going well, what's not going on. I'm having a lot of trouble replicating. I think it's just a different job, right? And the strengths and weaknesses are different. So on a personal level, I feel like I can be a much better leader in a remote universe. And I think over the last few months, one of the things that's changed is, as we've established our policy at Plaid, is a feeling like I really have to invest a lot more there. But I think your question is more about the future of financial services overall. Look, if you ask anybody from me in like a decade, will people get more of their financial needs served online through a phone than today? I think it's like multiple times 5 from today, or times 10 from today, right? I think we're still early. I think there's like a funny, to me it was funny, like cognito use case for identity verification, which is like to get your library card at your local library, right? Like now the way you get your library card is by proving your identity and your driver's license on your phone. Like you don't go somewhere to do that. So I think just if you look at digital identity, financial services online, we're at the beginning. The challenge for me at Plaid and as a platform is that as a platform you kind of have to guess what's the most important piece of core functionality that all your customers are going to need. And it's actually really hard. And if you look at the most forward thinking of Plaid's customer, they're building in-house the things that when I look at it, I'm like, we should have built that before. Like, we should have built that for them. But it's not that obvious to us because we don't talk to the end user. We don't talk to the consumer, right? We're disintermediated from the end user by all of you. So the big challenge for me is how to solve that. I think to be truly like world-class platform company to enable all this innovation that I know is going to happen, we have to change the relationship between us and you, and it has to become a true partnership. And I've used that word a bunch of times today. Like, I truly mean it. We are not there. I want like 20, 30 of you here to be close design partners with Plaid just once in the next 5 years. I think if we can do that, like for us, that's how we enable all of you to succeed. That's like the personal thing, but I'm just bullish on what we're building. It's really easy right now to get down and look at stock numbers and look at the world, but like the trends are here. It's not ever moving in the other direction. Like what you're all trying to do, it's the future, and we all know financial services are nowhere near where they need to be. So that's what gets me up every morning, and yeah, I've been here 5 years. Look forward to seeing you in another 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to sort of make sure that people are set up to ride the wave. There will be ups and downs, but zooming out, the trend is clear. I'm excited about seeing, we're going to grow internationally. Our product is still in the US, and we acquired a company based in the UK, and so I'm excited to see how all of that scales. We talked about diversification. That's definitely sort of what I'm excited about. I am also watching to see what's going to happen over the next few months, and a lot of people think like, okay, when you're in hyper growth, it's always, oh yeah, it's exciting, and if you're not, then it's not great. But I will say that when you have a little bit of time to think about things, you can actually invest a lot more in your internal talent. You can be intentional about the work that's happening, and it just gives you some time to kind of take a breath. And so I am excited about just looking across the board and making sure that we are investing in the way we want, and people are doing the best work that they can on a day-to-day basis.
That's really good leadership advice. Giving yourself slack time to think. I think for me, the thing that I guess I'm excited about with Cash is the international expansion. So I can never remember the exact time frame, but like very recently we acquired Afterpay, and those folks are phenomenal, and they're pushing the envelope in a lot of areas, and trying to understand how we can leverage, the awesome amount of awesome people that have come through the door, and they're challenging us in a lot of ways, which is phenomenal. And so, like, how can we leverage that to scale Cash globally, based off some of the learnings that they've had? So that's super exciting for me, because I do think we're at this transition point where we've scaled really well in the US, and there's obviously a lot more room for growth. But looking outside the US, what can we be doing? And like, I'm slightly biased, being that I'm not from the US, so I'd love to see, my parents using Cash App. I'd love to see like my family using it. We have employees globally, often some of which can't use the app, and so giving them access to that, because I think there's massive potential, like the underbanked, the unbanked communities. There's massive potential to, like, I guess, help them more in their financial lives and give them access to the financial system that they don't enjoy today, because it is so limited, and we are very privileged to be able to like have the access that we have. And I think a lot of us, like myself included, take it for granted.
I think that a couple things that resonated with me about what you all said is that it's been a really interesting year in the markets. I think we're all like aware of that. But I think that if you zoom out, like you were saying, and you think about it, like there's no way I'm ever going to go into a bank again to cash a check. Like I'm literally never going to do that again.
What's a check?
Like, I still get checks in the mail sometimes. I know, it's crazy. Like that needs to go away. And so when you think about that macro trend, right, like I think that's a good motivator to make sure that we're focused on continuing to prepare for that scale, and that even if there's some things that are a little bit uncertain, we can capitalize on the fact that we know that it's still going to trend in that direction, and it's a really great opportunity. There's like a lot of talk about how some of the biggest companies today were established in like downturns, right? Like Google and whatnot, right? So like, if you can find the thing that really makes the difference, like now's a great time to ship that. And so that's something that gets me really excited, is that there's an opportunity now to really put ourselves to the test and find the things that stick. And since there's no going back to cashing checks in person, like that's it's just an opportunity, I think, for us to find the next big thing and continue to push us in that direction. So I'm personally very excited about that opportunity, and hopefully somebody way smarter than me can figure out like what the right one is. So I think we're at over time, right? So
I believe so.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody. Hopefully there were some good lessons and stories for all of you. Cool.
Thank you.
Good talk. Very good.
Oh,